before there were streaming wars. Before shared universes swallowed every screen in the world. Before a single fandom could organize 1 million people without ever meeting face to face, there was a ship, a crew, and a network executive who thought the whole idea was a waste of airtime. September 8, 1966. A television screen flickers to life in living rooms across America, and something impossible walks onto the bridge of a starship that barely has a budget to exist. The ratings are unremarkable. The executives are unconvinced. Somewhere in a Los Angeles office, a memo is already being drafted that will call the whole concept too cerebral for its own good. Nobody in that room believes they are watching the birth of one of the most influential stories ever told. They have no idea how close it came to never happening at all, and how many times in the years that follow, it will nearly die again. This is the story they don't put in the highlight reels. Not the transporter beams. Not the Vulcan salutes. The story underneath all of that, of a captain who almost wasn't cast, a hero who was terrified of his own face, a kiss the network tried to bury, and a show so unwanted by the industry that it had to be resurrected from its own cancellation to become immortal. It starts, appropriately, with a man who walked away. Gene Roddenberry didn't build his starship around William Shatner. His first captain was Jeffrey Hunter, a serious, brooding actor who had once played Jesus Christ on the big screen and brought that same solemn gravity to the role of Christopher Pike. Hunter filmed the pilot. He was everything Roddenberry wanted. And then, for reasons that depend on who you ask, a disapproving wife, a sense that television was beneath him, he simply left. He would die 3 years later at 42, never once knowing what the thing he abandoned would become. Into that vacancy walked a different kind of actor entirely, bolder, more theatrical, more alive. The moment Shatner stepped onto that bridge, the entire soul of the show shifted with him. But Kirk wasn't the only character being reinvented in real time. On the drawing board, his first officer was supposed to look like something out of a nightmare, reddish, demonic skin, a face built to unsettle. It was only the technical limits of 1966 television, still airing mostly in black and white, that saved him from that fate. Red would have read as pure black on half the television sets in America. So the design shifted to a subtle greenish tint nobody would even notice once the show finally aired in color, and the ears did the rest. A creature designed to look like a devil became, instead, the most quietly beloved character in the franchise's history. And Leonard Nimoy, the man wearing those ears, spent the early days of production terrified they'd ruin him. He worried the pointed ears and alien features would make him look monstrous, a novelty act, not an actor. He worried more privately about what the role demanded emotionally: total suppression, total stillness, and a man trained his whole career to feel things loudly. What changed his mind wasn't a script note. It was the audience. Viewers looked at that stoic alien face and saw something Nimoy hadn't expected them to find: warmth underneath the logic, depth underneath the silence. He would go on to write 2 autobiographies about the character who nearly broke him. The first was called I Am Not Spock. The second, I Am Spock. Everything the show ever meant is contained in the distance between those 2 titles. Behind the actors, the production itself was quietly inventing solutions out of desperation. The plan had always been to show the crew descending to alien worlds the expensive way, full shuttle landings, spectacular and completely unaffordable. What the show could not buy, it had to invent. So a production team with no money and no time filmed sparkling dust falling in front of a black backdrop, reversed the footage and called it teleportation. A cost-cutting trick became one of the most enduring ideas science fiction has ever produced. One physicists still debate the plausibility of today. Nobody making it thought they were inventing a legend. They just needed a way to get their actors off a soundstage without bankrupting the studio. That kind of resourcefulness ran through everything. The phasers started life as plastic novelty ray guns pulled from a studio prop closet, repainted until they looked like the future, a toy that would later help inspire real-world research into directed energy weapons. The alien costumes were, more often than not, recycled human wardrobe. Roman togas repurposed as ceremonial robes, old Western costumes repainted into something interstellar. And the 11-foot model of the Enterprise, now sitting in the Smithsonian, was never finished on its underside, because no camera was ever going to point there, so why waste the paint? The entire universe of Star Trek was built out of things nobody was supposed to look at too closely. And it worked because television only has to hold its illusion for a few seconds at a time. But even a network willing to greenlight teleportation by glitter effect had limits, and the show found them fast. The very first pilot, an eerie, meditative episode called The Cage, was rejected outright. Too slow. Too cerebral. Not enough action. And, according to the executives of the era, entirely too much. A female first officer with real authority on the bridge was more than 1965 television was prepared to accept. It should have ended the show before it began. Instead, Roddenberry did something almost nobody in his position gets a chance to do. He got a second pilot. He stripped it down, sharpened it, and built the show around the captain and science officer that would define it for the next 60 years. And the rejected footage from The Cage? He didn't throw it away. He folded it into a two-part episode that went on to win a Hugo Award, turning the network's rejection into the only piece of Star Trek ever to receive science fiction's highest honor. That pattern, nearly dying, then transforming the wound into something extraordinary, would define the entire life of this show, on screen and off. Nichelle Nichols nearly walked away from Lieutenant Uhura after the first season, her resignation letter already sitting on Roddenberry's desk, Broadway calling her toward a different life. What she didn't expect was Martin Luther King Jr. approaching her personally at an NAACP event to tell her what her character meant. Not as an actress. As a symbol. For the first time, black children turning on their television sets could see someone who looked like them holding rank, holding authority, holding dignity at the very edge of human achievement. She withdrew her resignation the next morning. She would later call that single conversation one of the defining moments of her life. A role she almost gave up becoming one she couldn't have imagined walking away from. And it was that same character 2 years later at the center of a moment the network fought hard to prevent. When Kirk and Uhura were scripted to kiss on screen, NBC demanded the moment be softened. Not a choice but a compulsion forced by telekinetic aliens so nervous affiliates in the South could tell themselves it wasn't real. Shatner and Nichols had other plans. Take after take, they deliberately ruined the version where their heads stayed apart, until the only usable footage left was the one where they turned toward each other. The network got its disclaimer. The actors got the moment that mattered. Decades later, Nichols would recall a letter from a white viewer in the South who said that single kiss, on a science fiction show, had made him question everything he thought he believed. None of it was enough to save the show from cancellation, not once but nearly twice. After each of the first 2 seasons, network executives began quietly preparing to end it. And something happened that television had never really seen before. The audience organized. With no internet, no social media, no way to coordinate beyond letters and word of mouth, fans flooded NBC's offices with more than 1 million pieces of mail. They marched outside the network's headquarters. Twice, the pressure worked. The show was renewed, even as its budget shrank further with each passing season, until by the 3rd year the effects were reduced to little more than talking heads in half-finished rooms. It was finally canceled in 1969. By every conventional measure of 1960s television, it had failed. And then it did something almost no canceled show has ever done. It came back from the dead, not through the network but through syndication, rerun after rerun, discovered by a generation of college students who had been too young to watch it the first time and fell for it completely the second. The conventions began. The letters kept coming, only now they weren't fighting for survival, they were celebrating something that had already survived. What had been dismissed as a ratings failure became, slowly and then all at once, undeniable, spawning films, spin-offs, entire new generations of storytelling stretching nearly 60 years past the moment executives decided it wasn't worth keeping alive. It's easy looking back to focus on what the show got wrong, the toy guns, the recycled robes, the unfinished hull nobody was ever meant to see. But underneath the low budget and the borrowed costumes was something the network spreadsheets couldn't measure. A deliberate argument, smuggled past the censors in alien skin, that intuition and moral courage mattered more than cold calculation, that a divided world, painted half black and half white on a single humanoid face, was destroying itself over nothing. It was television as quiet rebellion, dressed as an adventure serial, reaching people who might have changed the channel if the message had come without the disguise. The flip phone borrowed its shape from a communicator that folklore said was impossible. The tablet in your hand echoes a prop called a PDD, sketched by someone who had no idea it would become real. Somewhere between a rejected pilot, a resignation letter that never got submitted, and a kiss the network tried to erase, a low-budget show that wasn't supposed to survive its first season quietly rewrote what science fiction, and television itself, was allowed to say out loud. It didn't just imagine a better future. It helped build the one we're standing in.